Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Chinese American genealogy. My name is Ginevra Morse, the Director of Education and Online Programs at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. I'll be moderating today's event. NEHGS is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are very pleased to offer this webinar today for our members and friends around the world. Giving today's presentation will be Alice Kane, Library Patron Services and Consultations Manager. Alice supervises our team of library genealogists, manages our consultation service, and works with staff to plan and enhance our services to patrons. She joined the NEHGS library staff in 2012 after a 19-year tenure as a librarian at the Boston Public Library. Alice's genealogical specialties include Chinese American genealogy, Massachusetts and New England genealogy, cluster research, database searching, maps, and migration. She earned a bachelor's degree in history from Harvard University. So in the next 45 minutes or so, Alice will provide a brief overview of the history of Chinese in America, highlighting the many immigration and exclusion acts that have happened in the last 100 or so years, discuss some considerations unique to Chinese genealogical research, and list a number of resources. At any time during the presentation, please feel free to write a question in the panel to the right of your screen. Alice will answer as many as she can in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the hour. This event is also being recorded, and the video will be posted to our website in the next couple of days. You can also take screen or slide captures by clicking on the camera icon on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. There is no handout for this lecture, but there is a fantastic subject guide by Alice Kane available at AmericanAncestors.org. There you'll find references to many of the resources that Alice will mention throughout today's presentation. So without further ado, I will turn things now over to Alice.
Thank you, Ginevra, and welcome to today's webinar about Chinese American genealogy. I am a first-generation Chinese American. My grandparents and father arrived in the U.S. in 1956 following the McCarran and Walters Act that based entry requirements on skill sets and reuniting U.S. residents with family members. Much of my research experience in Chinese American genealogy is based in the United States. In this webinar, I will be introducing you to the Chinese American experience in the United States and to resources for discovering your ancestor story. I would like to emphasize that today's overview of the history of the Chinese in America is a topic that could easily be an entire college course. So it will be a very, very quick highlight of the years as they've gone. The 2000 census, oops, wait a minute. I have the 2000 census of the United States finds Chinese Americans concentrated in major coastal cities of the United States. San Francisco was the initial port of entry, followed by additional entry points in Hawaii, the Northwest, the Northeast and Atlantic states, and then Texas over time since their first arrival in the 1840s. Like other countries around the world, China sent forth seafarers to explore near and far. Traders, laborers, and settlers followed in their wake. Chinese laborers spread across Southeast Asia since the middle of the Ming Dynasty at about 1500 AD. In the early 1800s, European colonialism in this region advanced the use of coolie laborers as replacements for African slaves. Coolie laborers could be found working as far away as South America and South Africa. This map is a quick look at the destination countries of these Chinese laborers. The coolie labor system was rife with abuse, and not a few were unwilling workers tricked into going abroad or outright kidnapped. The geographic focus of today's presentation is the four counties, or Siyi, or in Cantonese, Sayup, region of China's Guangdong province, formerly known as Canton. By the numbers, the largest number of migrants to the United States from the different districts within this province are from Toisan, Huiping, Yunping, and Sanwui, in that order. Some departed from the port of Guangzhou, which is the former Canton city, up into the north here. But you can see that from the proximity, migrants also could make their way to Macau and to Hong Kong for exit from the Asian continent. Popular imagery of Chinese coming to America are the male coolie worker and the female muizai. As mentioned previously, coolie workers could be found throughout Southeast Asia prior to and during Chinese migration to the United States. The cultural emphasis on having male children led to the death or sale into slavery of daughters. The muizai system was created as a compassionate system, not unlike apprenticeship, to raise and train excess females to useful skills. But abuse of the system was common, so that many, though not all, girls became prostitutes. Getting back to imperial China, the Qing dynasty followed that of the Ming and is the last imperial dynasty before the emergence of modern China. Qing emperors came from Manchuria and consolidated their rule over the Han Chinese people by 1661. The Han Chinese certainly objected to Manchurian rule and throughout this dynasty staged various campaigns against imperial forces. The most well-known conflicts are the Taiping Rebellion spanning 1850 through 1864 on the eastern Chinese coast, and the Bunde clan wars spanning 1855 to 1867 in Guangdong province. These conflicts, overpopulation, natural disasters of famine and drought, regional economic failures on the part of the Manchu government, and finally the lure of the American gold rush led to mass migrations from southeastern China to North America. The earliest Chinese immigrants were male peasants seeking employment and escape from their difficult economic and rural conditions. Laborers continued to come to the United States well after the gold rush ended and contributed their sweat to the building of the American West. Discrimination and exclusion laws trapped many Chinese males in urban enclaves, and their numbers slowly diminished over time. Some who remained in agriculture became successful despite discriminating restrictions. The 1960s through 1980s saw Chinese immigrants escaping political instability and repression in communist China, as well as those fulfilling a need for better education in the fields of various science disciplines and engineering. And that still continues today. American universities and colleges sponsoring entry into the U.S. increased the number of immigrating students, and when immigration quotas were finally normalized, coupled with better pay and job opportunities, encouraged a lot of students to remain. The latter part of this same 1960 through 80s period saw the arrival of asylum seekers in the form of boat people, who were ethnic Chinese escaping repression in Vietnam. The last of these people formally received asylum in the U.S. by the year 2008. Chronologically, at the close of the American Revolution, the old China trade began with the United States and the Qing Empire agreeing to trade under the Canton system, in which traders operated in a specific area of Guangzhou's harbor for a set season. By 1844, the United States signed a treaty with China that created 5 treaty ports and allowed entry of diplomats, merchants, and students to each other's territories. Gold fever in 1848 and 1849 lured Chinese laborers to try their luck in the California gold fields they called the Golden Mountain. Discrimination and violence led many Chinese miners to band together for support and safety. The end of the gold rush forced Chinese miners and those who came to try their luck in America to become cheap yet hardworking labor on the first transcontinental railroad, finally completed in 1869. Many were sojourner workers laboring for a time in the U.S., returning to China, and then back to the U.S. again at intervals. The Burlingame Treaty of 1868 created a more formal relationship between the U.S. and China that actually encouraged immigration of Chinese to American soil. However, fierce competition for jobs between Chinese, American, and European laborers after the railroad's completion led to more discrimination, violence, and increasing local legislation against Chinese. The 1875 Page Act specifically names Chinese laborers and prostitutes among the undesirables who could not enter the U.S. Local activism against the Chinese reached the national stage with the passing of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, prohibiting the entry of Chinese laborers for 10 years and barring their naturalization. Merchants, diplomats, and students could still enter, but were closely scrutinized. Also from this act, U.S. resident Chinese already abroad were required to obtain certificates of re-entry to be readmitted to the United States. The 1888 Scott Act prohibited the re-entry of all Chinese abroad from the U.S. at the time of its enactment. In 1882, the Geary Act extended the 1892 Geary Act extended the 1882 prohibitions for another 10 years and further required that U.S. residing Chinese carry a resident permit, that Chinese persons could not testify in court, and that Chinese be denied bail in habeas corpus cases. By 1902, the McCreary Act extended all previously enacted exclusion prohibitions with no end date. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake would prove a boon to Chinese, as vital and other records held in that city were destroyed by the subsequent fires. Enacted exclusion laws detained for deportation U.S.-born Chinese returning from sojourn trips to China. These detentions were vigorously fought through writs of habeas corpus in federal district courts. Finally, in United States versus Wong Kim Ark, or in Cantonese, Wong Kam Tak, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1898 that a child born in the U.S., though of Chinese parents in this particular case, was in fact a U.S. citizen. So that following the earthquake, Chinese males gained entry into the United States by declaring themselves either as having been born in San Francisco prior to 1906 or as a son of a Chinese American of that circumstance, and proceeded to present fake documents in support of that claim. Realizing that documents may be false, customs agents went to great lengths to ensure the identity of U.S.-born Chinese through interrogation and physical examinations. Chinese attempting to enter the country were initially detained aboard their transporting ships, but shipping companies objected to the delay, and so a dilapidated warehouse structure on the San Francisco dock was used for several years instead. Living conditions in this structure was hazardous and unsanitary. Angel Island, called the Ellis Island of the West, operated between 1910 and 1940 as an immigration station featuring facilities for the segregation and detention of Chinese immigrants and for their interrogation and examination. The waiting between interviews and examinations dragged on for weeks, months, years for some detainees. Those who gave up waiting either returned to China or committed suicide. The 1940 fire at the administration building closed the facility and operations were transferred to mainland San Francisco. With China as an ally in World War II, the Chinese Exclusion Acts were repealed in 1943 and allowed Chinese to be considered U.S. citizens. However, the quota for Chinese permitted U.S. entry was set at 105 per year to continue controlling their numbers. The 1952 McCrary and Walters Act, as well as the 1965 Hart and Sellers Act, shifted away from and finally abolished this quota system, replacing it with a preferential system focusing on the skills of immigrants and the relationship to U.S. residents. Between 1955 and 1970, the Chinese Confession Program was operated by the by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, also known as the INS, to curb illegal Chinese immigration by calling on Chinese residents in the U.S. to confess their illegal entry in return for legalizing their residence status. The legitimization of their status would work to relieve the constant fear of discovery and to help eliminate the number of immigration slots held open for supposed children of Chinese Americans already documented during exclusion. Now that we have some historical background, there are special considerations when conducting a family history project for Chinese American individuals. We will briefly go over points about language, names and surnames, dates, and calendars. Officially, there are standardized systems of transliterating Mandarin Chinese into a Latin alphabet. Wade-Giles is the longtime standard, later joined by the Yale system, and Hanyu Pinyin, or just Pinyin, was developed in the 1950s and is the principal system in use today. Now that you're aware of these transliteration systems, you can forget about them. Customs agents who processed Chinese immigrants did their jobs to the best of their abilities and experience and were not given any formal training for their record keeping. Chinese names were rendered phonetically. The variety of sounds is due to the informant's dialect, particular to his place of origin, as well as the recorder's education level and experience with foreign names and spellings. The loyalty and veracity of hired Chinese translators was often not trusted, so standard spellings for Chinese surnames evolved very slowly. There is also confusion about the sequence of Chinese characters in names, which are usually 3 to 4 characters long. The family name comes first, followed by the given name. A customs agent not aware of this sequence could and did record the last part of the given name as the family name. It should be noted that some Chinese males may have had several names during a lifetime, and such a practice made it difficult and confusing for U.S. officials to identify and track a specific individual. Tradition notes 100 common Chinese surnames, but a true count is actually in the thousands. Statistically, the 100 common surnames represented by these lists are less than 5% of the total surnames ever recorded and are actually used by 85% of the Chinese population worldwide. The common surname tables on these informational pages will give you name meanings, pronunciations, and sometimes an area of origin. This table illustrates the most common Chinese names with their respective characters as recorded in the 2000 U.S. Census and compared with those found in China's 2007 Census with their rankings numbered. The top 3 surnames in China are Wang, Li, and Zhang. Japu, or Gapo, are Chinese lineage books tracing the male members of a family in a particular region of China. Few females are mentioned, and if they are, often by family name only. Within such books are not only vital statistics, but also descriptions of family origins, locations, and maps of burial grounds and migration patterns. Some Japu document the tradition of family poems, from which each generation incorporates a single character in sequence of the verse as part of their given name. Those familiar with the family poem will know exactly which generation from the first ancestor a particular individual is a member of. The largest collection of Japu I am aware of is held by the Shanghai Public Library, which has an ongoing conservation program to restore and preserve the 100,000 volumes rescued from dumpsters and paper mills where they were tossed after the arrival of the communists. The library's online Japu catalog is in Chinese, but can be searched to locate not only the holdings entry, but also view the PDF images of the Japu listed. Ancestry.com and Family Search also have assembled a Japu index and digitized editions, respectively, for viewing online. Searching their respective databases can begin in English, but you will need reading knowledge of Chinese to drill down to specific Japu works and to fully appreciate the Japu's digitized content. Most of the records you'll encounter will be in English, but in the case of Japu and other resources such as materials within exclusion case files, gravestones, and family papers, you will need to translate. For translation and learning Chinese, the dictionary app from Pleco offers features for all levels of user experience with apps. As illustrated on the right, a person could write a character on the screen and the app will auto-recognize and translate. Or for those more familiar with Chinese, lookups can be done by entering a character radical or pinyin edition of the word. A flashcard feature can also help you learn and memorize characters at your own pace. The basic app is free, and for additional cost, enhancements such as additional dictionary entry additions and optical character recognition are available. The optical character recognition allows the app to scan a photo image of Chinese text and offer a translation. For centuries, dates were based on the year reign of a particular emperor and was written as, for example, 8th year of the Qing Emperor Tongzhi. Here are the Qing emperors and the lengths of their reigns who were in power during the late 19th and early 20th centuries when Chinese began migrating to the United States in significant numbers. The last Qing emperor, also known as Henry Puyi, reigned briefly before the founding of the Republic of China by Dr. Sun Yat-sen in 1911. Researching in the United States, you are likely to encounter dated documents based on the Republic of China's founding as the regnal year. Once a specific year is determined, the month and day notations may require conversion from the Gregorian calendar to a lunar one, or vice versa. The Hong Kong Observatory has taken the guesswork out of the Gregorian to lunar conversions by creating PDF tables for each year between 1901 and 2100. For those years prior to 1901, try this online calculator from asiahome.com. Input the lunar month and day with the year, and the calculator will display the Chinese and Gregorian dates. This is one of the simpler to use calculators available on the web, but I caution you that the rest of the site is quite pink. Heading into resources for discovering your Chinese American family history, we will review sources commonly available for this kind of research and then discuss some specific to Chinese Americans. For those whose families have been in the United States several generations, census and city directories can provide a snapshot of where and what your family members were doing in specific years. For those not familiar with the U.S. Census, it should be noted that data for the 1890 census, the first census taken after enactment of the exclusion laws, was destroyed by fire before the data was released. So it's not possible to see where anyone is for that particular census year. As Chinese laborers dispersed to other work following the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, many settled into cities. City directories are good resources for tracking ancestors living in an urban setting, and comparison of directory data over time can yield more information or clues about your ancestor. Before, during, and after the passing of the exclusion laws, restrictive legislation and ordinances began appearing in state and local jurisdictions, requiring the recording of personal identifying information and often involving fees and taxes. For example, when Chinese laundries proliferated in San Francisco, an ordinance was passed to restrict and fine the use of rooftops by Chinese-owned laundries to dry clothing. All other owners were exempt by omission from the law. Check with state and local libraries for texts of Chinese-specific legislation and ordinances to see which agency or department recorded the information and had the funds collected. track down where those historical records are now. Following the December 17, 1943 repeal of the exclusion laws, the first Chinese American to be naturalized in 1944 was Edward Bing Khan, an interpreter for the Immigration and Naturalization Service's Chicago office, a position he held for more than 35 years. By 1945, nearly 800 more Chinese Americans received naturalization and qualified to vote. Check local clerk and election offices for voter registration forms that will provide you with the date and court of your ancestors' naturalization decree. Despite restrictions and discrimination, Chinese residents in the U.S. who were able to save money could and did buy property. So you can look for records of ownership and taxation with local land registries and assessors' offices. While Chinese in the United States have served in military forces since the Civil War, Chinese Americans joined the military in numbers for World War II following the repeal of exclusion. My granduncle Harry was such an enlistee. He came to the U.S. as a paper son and served in the Army in the European theater. He was one of a handful of his company to survive a prolonged firefight in an Italian town during his service. Pictured here is his Form DD-214, the official summary of his military service, medals, and injuries. The National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri, has charge of military service records for all military branches. However, a 1973 fire destroyed much of the Army and Air Force records. Specifically, it was an 80% loss of Army records dating from between 1912 to 1960, and a 75% loss of Air Force records covering the latter part of 1947 through January 1st of 1964 for names alphabetically following that of James Hubbard. An alternate source of DD-214 forms or their informational content could be held by the state adjutant general's offices or their archives in the service person's state of residence. Adjutant generals are the chief military administrators for their respective states' defense forces, including Army and Air National Guard, and so would maintain a record of current and former military personnel residing in the state. Gravestones are another record form that could yield details about your Chinese American family members. So that their origins are not forgotten, Chinese American gravestones often include the name of the deceased's province or district and the ancestral village. This gravestone belongs to my grandmother, King Yi, which also mentions her maiden name of Li and a village of origin in China. Outlined in green are the relevant vital elements with date information on one side and place of origin on the other. It should be noted that the gravestones of married females will record the home district and village of her husband as the place of origin. Vital information is often, but not always, recorded using regnal years and lunar dates. On this particular stone, the vital years are written with regnal years based on the Republic of China. So the translation says that she was born in the prime year of the Republic, that is 1911, and she died in its 57th year, 1968. In another example, this is the gravestone belonging to my great-grandparents, showing informational elements for two people at the same time. The written dating elements on this gravestone does not use regnal years. Instead, it uses calendrical terms denoting particular years within the then-current 60-year cycle of the Chinese lunisolar calendar. For these ancestors of mine, they are all recorded as coming from the Huiping district of Guangdong province. The name of the village is Zhou Gamlei, which may or may not be findable on a local map. I've tried. Getting to more specific resources for Chinese American research. In California and possibly other states on the West Coast and beyond, qualifying Chinese men had to carry a certificate of residence as mandated by the Geary Act. At this time, I'm not aware of any one large collection of such certificates. The Chinese Historical Society has a collection of 17. I suggest using archivegrid.org to locate manuscript and archival holdings. ArchiveGrid is an aspect of worldcat.org that lists materials found in archives, libraries, museums, and historical societies. Using the search term Chinese Certificates of Residence will net you a list of interesting results to review. ArchiveGrid is constantly being added to by repositories all over the U.S., so be sure to check it periodically for potential new sources. The original certificate pictured here is held by the Bancroft Library at the University of California in Berkeley. The National Archives and Record Centers around the United States hold naturalization and other records filed within their respective regions. Naturalization petitions contain the most information about a person's origins at the time of filing and can be very useful for those applying after the repeal exclusion. Modern petitions include the Alien Registration File Number, or A number, of each foreign-born person entering the U.S. A copy of these A files may be obtained from the Department of Homeland Security using the form number noted here. Under the Freedom of Information Act, if the file is someone else's, or under the Privacy Act, if the file is your own. Regional National Archives also hold records from federal courts that were held in those respective areas. The U.S. Commissioner's records documents the habeas corpus cases brought to a U.S. District Court. Docket books, such as those pictured here from the New England region, record the criminal cases brought before a particular commissioner, noting the complaint warrant, judgment, and deportation order against a Chinese man found without sufficient residency documentation. Many of these docket volumes are unindexed, but exclusion case files are usually easy to find in these books, as they're the only ones that include a photograph of the so-called criminal. This record group might also hold copies and transcriptions of case file papers. Getting to the main type of documents available, Chinese exclusion case files are held by various National Archives branches around the U.S. Within each case file are the documentary history of each Chinese individual officially entering the U.S. Here and in the next few slides are samples of documents found in individual case files at the New England branch. These gentlemen each applied for a re-entry certificate for an upcoming trip to China. They must have a certificate, or they will not, or they'll be barred from re-entering the U.S. on their return. All applicants underwent the same interrogation process as they had upon entering the United States. They would have been asked the same questions, and their answers would have been compared to those already in their files from when they first entered the country. Any discrepancies in comparing the answers warranted further scrutiny that may have led to simple rejection of the application or perhaps deportation proceedings. Both of these documents are duplicate copies of reentry certificates issued by the Boston office of the INS. The one in pink is a color code denoting that the holder would be leaving and returning from the same port of entry. I understand from archival staff that in some offices the color coding was used to denote a rejected application. Women marrying Chinese Americans also had difficulties. In this sample, Margaret Blindhofer married Larry Kan Yong Ching just after World War II. The upper letter from the Boston INS documents Mrs. Ching's marriage and entry into the U.S. at Boston to go cross-country to join her husband in Honolulu, where he is stationed. The lower letter notifies the Boston office of her arrival in Honolulu. Because of her marriage to a Chinese American, her movements within the U.S. were highly scrutinized. It should also be noted that, according to early immigration laws, a woman lost her U.S. citizenship if she married a foreign-born man because she assumed his citizen status at marriage. The 1922 Cable Act, also known as the Married Women's Citizenship Act, allowed a woman to retain her U.S. citizenship when marrying, quote, an alien eligible to naturalization, end quote. However, until the repeal of exclusion, Chinese were considered racially ineligible to naturalize, and so U.S. women marrying Chinese men before exclusion lost their citizenship because of the Cable Act. From the case file of Mui Hong Tuk between 1926 and 1962, we see his history as a paper son. Paper children were the supposed children of a person claiming to be a U.S. citizen, and they brought in papers saying, documenting that fact. So in this sample here, on the left is a typescript of a memo recording his interrogation questions and answers. In the middle, from the file, is the formal determination letter by the Customs Service allowing his entry into the U.S. that includes a photo of himself and that of his supposed U.S. citizen father. The final page on the right is part of his recorded confession documents. The page literally represents his full history. The column on the left documents his paper family members, including their respective case file numbers. And on the right is the column that records his confessed true identity. Children born in the U.S. but traveling with their parents to China underwent the same application process for a reentry certificate. This girl is the daughter of a college professor. Her file contained a copy of her birth certificate in Massachusetts and reentry certificate copies obtained for her when she was aged 3 and 7. While she would not have undergone interrogation, her parents would have been interrogated to verify all of their identities. Again, the respective answers from each parent would have been compared to their own answers in their files during an early interrogation, and any discrepancies would have invited further scrutiny. Ancestry.com has a growing number of databases pertaining to Chinese in the U.S. These may be checked using the card catalog feature of this website. Ancestry is a subscription-based service, but you can check with your local library for an institutional membership you can access with your library card. FamilySearch.org offers genealogical records and index databases, but has only 2 databases for China: the Japu collection and the China Cemetery records spanning 1820 through 1983, which is currently not a very comprehensive collection of cemetery records for this time frame. It offers records for select cemeteries in Hong Kong and Taiwan only. So do check back with this particular collection to see if there are any additions. The Family Search site also offers access to the online catalog of the Family History Library, and from the catalog search page, you can check for what might be available in the library or one of its branches. Selecting the surname search will find you holdings of genealogies, many of which the Family History Library has available in microfilm format or as an ebook edition linked to that record. Microfilmed records and books can be rented from within the catalog page and then be viewed at one of the library's family history centers. A geographic search by place name will give you a categorized list of records and histories for your place of interest. Again, microfilmed items from this list can be rented for viewing at a family history center near you if it is not already a digitized database collection. Slowly, there are more resources for researching Chinese American genealogy and history and making connections. Chinese American museums, historical societies, and special interest groups of historical societies and libraries are resources for not only information, but also for individuals conducting research for the same family or in the same region. One is by the Chinese Family History Group of Southern California, featuring links to resources and tools for conducting research into your family history, as well as ways to preserve your family documents and photographs. Look also to the library collections of colleges and universities, particularly where Chinese Americans have settled. Within their holdings, there may be specific family paper collections. The Vancouver Public Library offers a detailed subject guide for Chinese Canadian genealogy for those seeking ancestors who may have entered Canada first before coming down to the United States. Again, other web suggestions are also available in my Chinese American Genealogy Subject Guide on our AmericanAncestors.org website. In closing, researching your Chinese American story will not be easy with the language and naming considerations mentioned earlier. Be wary of spelling variants in American records and of the method of dating in Chinese documents and gravestones. Follow up on records that were generated because of local restrictive laws or ordinances. While your family member might not be listed, reviewing and analyzing the data set that you find will give you an impression of what your ancestor experienced. Keep in mind, too, that some historical records are being transcribed locally as projects and are then published as web content or as a hard copy book. You can check worldcat.org or the local library's online catalog by record type, like tax or assessor records, or the name of the jurisdiction, such as San Francisco County, California, to see what might be available. Since it was largely the U.S. government versus the Chinese, definitely look to federal records for your ancestor, particularly exclusion case files and alien registration files and federal court case files. More resources are being developed and put online as Chinese American interest in discovering their history increases. Reach out to the Chinese American interest groups of historical and genealogical societies to gain research knowledge and to exchange family information. This is the end of my presentation. I thank you for making time to join me today and for your kind attention. Good day.
All right. Thank you, Alice, for your presentation. So now let's tackle your questions. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and type it in the questions panel to the right of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time provided. So Alice, just to clarify, could Chinese Americans naturalize only after the appeal of the Exclusion Acts?
In the history of the United States, early Chinese, when they arrived in this country after the gold rush, those that stayed did in fact become naturalized citizens. But with the passing of the exclusion laws, the Chinese that did receive naturalization had them revoked. So that for a time there were Chinese naturalizations of Chinese prior to the exclusion. But the Exclusion Acts leveled the whole field until after repeal.
All right, and again, just to clarify, so did marriage to an American citizen confer citizenship? Or when was that the case as well?
As I mentioned before, Chinese men were the principal immigrants to the United States, so that in terms of being here, they would have married American-born women, and they definitely would have lost their citizenship upon marriage. That they would have regained their citizenship only after the exclusion laws. The Cable Act, which for a time after 1922 did mitigate the loss of citizenship for some women, but those that married Chinese strictly lost their citizenship.
And Denise asks, so once immigration was allowed based on skill set, is there any data available about what skill sets were typically represented?
The skill sets definitely would have been tracked. To find out more about the skill sets that were of interest, you would need to look into the accumulated annual reports from the Immigration Service. They would have kept track of those numbers, and that would mean going into a government document repository and doing a search for annual or quarterly compilations of that kind of data.
All right, and Kathleen asks, do you have any suggestions for finding ancestors who came to Hawaii when it was a kingdom and not part of the United States?
That would certainly be something that you may have to look to historical archives in Hawaii. Actually, the National Archives and Records Center covering the Hawaiian Islands is actually based in California, I believe in San Francisco's San Bruno area. So that it may be possible to go into the National Archives online catalog, and you could do a search on historical Hawaiian records that might have been transferred to the National Archives. But I think that perhaps the state archives in Hawaii would be another destination for you to check on where pre-statehood records might be kept.
All right, and Betty asks, how do you find out what name your ancestor used when they came into the country? And it looks like she has a second question about kind of variations and how to search for different spellings of last names, but if you could maybe talk about that first question. So how do you find out what name your ancestor used when coming into the country?
The original name of a Chinese immigrant is definitely going to be very difficult to find. Once a Chinese male marries, they often did change their names, and if it's not written down and passed down within the family, it will be harder to locate from an exclusion case file point of view. Whatever you are aware of in terms of names or identities or locations that your ancestor might have been in, the exclusion case files within each respective National Archives branch have been largely indexed in the catalog. In some branches, for example, the New England branch has compiled a special spreadsheet to accumulate all the names together, and that list can be sorted in a couple of different ways. The National Archives has gone quite a ways to get as many of the exclusion case files at least basically indexed within their catalog so that you can search by name, and you may need to use wildcard searching to try and find variants in names.
Yeah, I think we can maybe go into that question a little bit in greater detail. So if you are searching online catalogs or online databases. In Betty's case, she says that her grandfather's last name is sometimes spelled ENG, sometimes it's just NG. So what strategies or tips could you suggest when you are searching online by surname and you know that there are going to be lots of different spellings?
Well, it's definitely going to be a wildcard situation if the database search engine allows it. The other thing is that when you are working with the name, you may want to perk up your ears a little bit and see and listen to how it's pronounced within the family, and then start jotting down the possible variants. From speaker to speaker, the pronunciations will be different, and then as well as the dialects. That would be one way to try and get a mild handle on how to find a spelling of a common name, or a short one in this case, a very short one.
And Alice, could you just explain what a wildcard is?
Database wildcard, it's possible to do wildcard searches in databases by substituting a special symbol in place of multiple letters that a word might contain. So for the example of eng with the ENG, possible NG, you could do a standard wildcard is the asterisk symbol, a little star symbol on your keyboard. You could place that in front of the NG and ask the database to do a search and see what that comes up with. Any possible letter before that, or sometimes even a string of letters before that, would come up. Other wildcards that can be used is a question mark in front of the sequence or in the middle of a sequence. So if you had a surname such as Wong, the vowel in the middle could be an O, it could be an A, it could be something entirely different depending on who jotted it down in the first place. So you could put either an asterisk or a star in the middle to represent, I don't know what the vowel might be. Please search and show me the results that have everything around this symbol. And that's how you could do a wildcard search.
Thanks for the clarification. Now, there are a few people who are asking about genealogical resources available in China. So Jill asks, for example, are there genealogical resources available in China that are accessible to American researchers?
What is available online is likely going to be the Shanghai Library's Japu catalog. That, as well as the Japu collections from Ancestry and Family Search, would have the most Japu available to get access to some Chinese information without actually having to go there. For all other records, it would definitely be a matter of having a guide to get you to the correct locations within the province or the district of your ancestors, and knowing where the records are. A lot of records were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, so that Shanghai Library, and as I understand, other libraries around the Southeast Asian area, have tried to collect any and all Japu that they encounter so that they're not lost. But it is difficult to access more records beyond what has been digitized without actually going to the country of origin.
Thank you. So it looks like we've answered most of the questions. If you'd like more hands-on help with your project, or if you have more specific or more detailed questions about your own research, you may want to consider scheduling a consultation or even hiring our research services team. If you're interested in learning more about these services, you can write to the email addresses on the current slide. I'll also include this information in my follow-up email to you tomorrow. So thank you again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and offer online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.